Ananthamurthy himself gave a letter to me to stay back in Dhanyaloka. And that also another influential point. See, and he was the vice chancellor. No vice chancellor those days give a personal letter to a young student who is no one. But I went visited his house and he gave a personal letter to me. Dear and respected poetry lovers and poets and writers, dramatists and all the other dignities here. And Pratibha is also my friend and she's sitting there, one of my favorite poets from Kannada. And I'm very much proud and privileged that I'm invited to inaugurate this kind of a seminar on one of the greatest poets of India nowadays, and also a great and elder brother to me, and the person who influenced me a lot beyond language. So I see I'm standing here, and I remember I rewind myself 33 years back when I met Shivaprakash in Mysore. I was a kid compared with the other young writers with me. A.J. Thomas, you know him, he's very much familiar in Bangalore. Thomas was also another elder brother. Myself, accompanied with Thomas, came to Dhanyaloka for some research work, academic research, part of my studies. And Ananthamurthy himself gave a letter to me to stay back in Dhanyaloka. And that also another influential point. See, and he was the vice chancellor. No vice chancellor those days give a personal letter to a young student who is no one. But I went visited his house and he gave a personal letter to me. And you go and do the work, because my dissertation is very weird. It's on African contemporary Anglophone African poetry. Very few books are in our library. So I came to Dhanyaloka. I was staying in that youth hostel near to Dhanyaloka. I don't know, is it there still? That youth hostel is there? Yeah, still there. Okay. It was a rainy night. So it was such a very torrential kind of downpour. We were, myself and Thomas, sitting outside the pavement of that youth hostel. We were discussing. We were smoking. We were the chain smokers those days. We were smoking and discussing, and all the myself and Thomas always arguing each other. And I can see, we ran out of cigarette, and I can see one person was smoking nearby, a tall man in the dark silhouette. And I was very much thirsty to smoke, and I asked, I didn't ask him, but he came to us, listening some words. He asked me and Thomas, are you speaking about Ritik Khatak? We were discussing about the Ritik Khatak. Those days I am very much hardcore communist those days. So I was speaking about IPTA and the Indianized filmmaking of Ritik Khatak is better than Satyajit Ray. That kind of discussion is going on. These are the opinions in those days. Now I am a little bit different person. Anyway, with that discussion, Shiva can absorb any language. He had such a talent. So he can follow a little bit Malayalam. And he came to us and he joined the discussion and we joined the smoking. And we finished the whole cigarette that night and with the rain. I think almost up to early morning we were discussing. I recite the poem Madakalam, the title poem you mentioned, the rainy season. That's the translation of that poem. I am only 23, 24 years old. And Shiva told me this poem resembles one of the poems by an Hungarian poet. And he mentioned that name. I didn't remember that name. Then I thought, is he such a scholar? He can easily assimilate one poem listening to a poem in everywhere in the world, connected with any poem in the world. And also Shiva, and I asked him to recite one poem. Then he recited, O Prana Shakti Devi. And I was totally embarrassed and I was shocked with his recited huge big sound and things like that. And also I remember my teacher and poet Vinay Chandran that moment. And I mentioned, and then we spoke about Vinay Chandran also. And he also became an eternal friend of Shivaprakash later. And I think Vinay Chandran is very famous and Hanumandeji also mentioned about him now. And yeah, he is my teacher and my friend, and he's almost like a little kid. He's such an innocent poet he was, and so unfortunately he passed away earlier. Anyway, from that day, that night, Shivaprakash is part of my life, and he's someone who turned my perspective, the whole radical perspectives about poetry in that young age. That's why I am standing here, I think. That's why he invited me. Not because I am such a big poet or like him, I'm sure. But he is something like an informal teacher to me. I know he's a very good teacher, but we spoke in an equal terms, and we argued sometimes with politics, but always I feel as a teacher, because he's such a vibrant scholar and very informal. He's an anti-teacher sometimes. He can de-school your knowledge. That I will come to that point later. Anyway, I remember in the daytime, the next day, we were in Sahityalokadalli campus. We met Jayanta Mahabatra there for the first time. We three were there. And only once I met Jayantoji, but after 40 years, I talked to him by phone. He told, you with Shivaprakash and Thomas, I remember the young man, as a young man you met me in Sahityalokadalli. So the poets have that much good memory in terms of poetry and poets, not in other subject matters, households and family life, love life. They are very irresponsible most of the time. Not I'm telling generally, but in the remembering poetry, and see, poetry is such a medium that is the fraternity, the eternal fraternity of something like an archetypal brotherhood. Fraternity is there in between poets, I think. I don't know, I'm blind in that. Maybe in between the painters or musicians, it would be there. But I am sure that this kind of fraternity is there in poetry. Anyway, after that, those days, we again used to meet in Delhi. I was in Delhi for 1.5 years. More than 1.5 years. Those days, he became the real teacher. I don't have any job there. I was a little bit writing something in some journals and just sit back in the library, Sahitya Academy library, and take the books on behalf of Shivaprakash. Otherwise, I don't have a membership there. I'm known in that library. And on behalf of Shivaprakash, I started reading books on all the other Indian language literatures. In the evenings, afternoons, most of the days, he made a call to the internal telephone, that facilities there, not the mobile phones those days. The youngsters, they don't know about the intercom. The intercom is the only way to communicate in a building. And from intercom, I would get a call from Shiva to come here. That's the only thing he mentioned. And I will go there and sit back with him in his editor's room. And he started reciting, so not his poems. He started, sometimes he recites by Sri Sri. He's very much well-versed in Sri Sri. And in the spot he translated. For the first time I listening to Sri Sri, I started following Sri Sri because of Shivaprakash. And also the classical Kannada poetry, I started to acquainted with classical Kannada poetry just because of Shivaprakash. He just quote from Kumaraswamy or Pampa or any of the classical medieval, the kind of poets he can quote, and not only quoting, the moment he can translate also. That's why I can communicate. Otherwise, I cannot follow Kannada. That is the lingua. I think Shivaprakash is one of the lingua franca in the southern languages of poetry, in between poets. That is one of the major contribution, I think, other than poetry. And see, of course, Vajana. I was, see, after that sessions with Shiva in Delhi, I am very much close to Vajana, and I think Vajana is from my language itself. I never feel it's a neighboring kind of, it's an exotic kind of other literature. It is my own literature. So I transformed into a pan-Indian kind of poetry reader through Shiva. Otherwise, I have so many prejudices of language centrism about. See, most of the poets have language centric because they works in the micro language. It is not their fault. Most of the poets brought up in their own language. They cannot think beyond they cannot imagine everything in their own language. That's a quality also. But some poets have the ability to transform that kind of psyche into various languages. That is, Shiva is that kind of a poet, I think. No, everyone cannot do it. I cannot do it. I can little bit manage English because I don't have another way to get into the world. Otherwise, so I compelled to learn English. My father was a Tamil scholar, but I couldn't learn Tamil. I was always, everything is in Malayalam. But Shiva is one of the turning points in my life. And see, after the transformation, I have the courage to edit one of the famous, the translation of one of the famous Vajana by Basavanath done into Malayalam by Vinay Chaitanya. He's a very good scholar, but his Malayalam translation is not that much fluent because his poetic language he's not a practicing poet. So I edited it. I can read it. I think I have the copy. See, the Vajana is very famous. I didn't mention. I will recite the Malayalam, then you will get it. Ullavar Shivalayam Paniyum Nyanandu Chayan Daridranaya Yenda Kale Tuna Udale Kovil Shirase Ponin Kalashamaya Stavaratin Ajibunda Jangamatin Ajivilla Kudala Sangama Deva Kelkaya. See, this discipline of transforming from one language to other without missing the meaning and the rhythm and the pashaya. I learned it from Shiva. That's why I recited it. Otherwise, I couldn't. I don't have that much courage to touch in another language. The poets are very much afraid of language also. You cannot touch into the language. Language is beyond. It's lakhs and lakhs of years back. It is evolved. It's a bio world. Then we should be humble in front of language. So, but sometimes you get the courage to touch. That moment, it will be creative. It illuminates meaning. See, anyway, this basic translation is not mine. Basic translation is Vinaya's, and I did some work, some poetic crafted work within his translation. Anyway, that's the story of how Shiva became my anti-teacher. I call the word not teacher, anti-teacher, and I call him Shiva. He called him Anwar, but always almost in the fringe of a guru and shishya, I can feel his life. In this moment, and he can feel, I'm sure he can feel my life in this moment. And I will finish with some observations on his poetry also. Is it lengthier? Okay. See, I'm very much sorry that I couldn't read in Kannada. But I am very much familiar with most of the better good poems of Shiva in English. And he himself is a very good translator, and you know that just after his young experiments, he became a bilingual poet also. So he can write and he can translate himself into English, and also the Kamalagar Bhatt and the other translators have done. In Malayalam there is no such good translator. That also I am sure that I am a little bit jealous about this book, because we don't have such a good translators like Kamalagar Bhatt and Shiva himself. And I will quote from Dark Kashmir, the later poem, one of the later poems. Sometimes, I'm sorry that I quote in English. very sorry in front of the Kannada audience. That's our Indian limitation. Sometimes you are like an eagle, sometimes like a sparrow. Poem, I have followed you like a shadow wherever you sit or fly. I turn small when you move away from earth. I turn big when you begin to descend down. When you sat on the branch of the tree to eat the fruit of truth, I have sat on the branch of the shade, eating the fruit of the shade. When you sat on the branch of the tree to eat the fruit of truth, I have sat on the branch of the shade, eating the fruit of the shade, until the troops of darkness overran the western quarter. This is very, very micro usage of political words in this poem. It's a definition of poetry also. Still, it is a very contemporary political. It is very spiritual. Troops of darkness, you can connect with Kashmir very easily. And see, it is, see, and some other words are also in that poem. I think anyway, he can easily connect the political and spiritual together. That is such one unusual ability of it's a sign of a major poet. Only major poets can do it. It's a dialectical nature. Some people can argue that it is something contradictory or things. But that kind of negative arguments came from the insensibility, I think. If you are a sensible poetry reader, poetry lover, if you are a micro reader, you can understand how in the micro level, in the underground of micro meanings, how political and spiritual connected. In most of Shiva's poetry, this connection everywhere. So he dared to go to the classical medieval or subaltern medieval or very ancient kind of traditions everywhere. See, if a mediocre poet, if go to enter into that dangerous terrain, he will be troubled, and not only he cannot do such good poems, but Shiva can make such magical poems from Machu Picchu, from any of the Indian or Pan-Asian or South Asian, Latin American, from any tradition, or from the local traditions of Kannada or Karnataka or Kerala, from villages, from tribal cultures, everywhere. See, one line from that Cuba poem. He wrote a series of Cuba poems. One line I stuck in that line. I didn't get that lines. But see, it is the left lineage is there in that poem. Still, the lineage towards spiritual kind of tradition is also there. Both see, most of the Cuban poems I read written by the modernist poets like Ayyappa Panikar and so many of the Indian poets. And so most of the modernist poets in the 20th century wrote about Cuba. Most of them are that little bit romantic about the earlier Cuban revolution. But Shiva is not that much romantic, but he can connect the revolution and the sacrifice with the spiritual aspirations of Latin American tradition. I couldn't find that line. And I have to mention about Machu Picchu. It is one of the masterpiece by Shivaprakash, I think. And I think one of the masterpiece in Indian languages, I think. I'm sure. And I want to translate it into Malayalam also. That poem stands, I think everyone is familiar with that poem, I think. Yeah. Anyway, for my satisfaction, I will read some of the lines. Anyway, basically two questions. One question on the that temporality of Machu Picchu, the heights. The city of heights. And the second question directly to Carol, the first city in American continent. I can quote. What is the root cause of varied splendor that human skill slips into stones, bricks, metals, and wood? And of your rising pyramids, founded on human blood, O blessed city centers, O broken stones of abandoned temples, what is the foundation of your preordained devastation? Then the question turned into something like a trial. A tone. It's like put the civilization into a trial. What could it be other than fear, the dreadful mother of your murderous weapons? Is human story a brief comma between two words, fear and violence? Is human story a brief comma between two words, fear and violence? Is human life a fledgling bird fluttering between the previous murder and the next earth's most precious harvest? It's very relevant in these days. This kind of poets are professing people, And second part of the poem, mostly a debate with Karl, the ancient city, the ancient most city in the American continent. It is a city lost in the sands. And poet asked a question to Karl: how could you survive and prosper without fortifications, without defending armies or deadly arsenals? Always in peace for 1,000 years, while wind and water roared restlessly. When you read this poem in the context of the people like Hitler, who promised Germans that Nazis going to rule for 500 years. But now a poet asks, how you survive for 1,000 years in peace? That is the counter question towards this kind of this false eternity that deliberately try to apply by these fascist kind of rulers all over the history. I am not mentioning the names in India, that you can assess who are those kind of people. Anyway, I think I took too much time. And time is, for Shiva, time is impersonal and biological time. He can elaborate into ancient times or medieval time and to future. And also he can squeeze time, historical time, into his own soul also. This dialectical work is always happening in his subconscious, I think. That's why he is one of his, that one sentence from the same poem, O home older than all our homes. See, our biological homes, not that much bigger that much vast in the history, but in the anthropocentric history, the home is very, very, very vast. It's prolonged to the history from future to past and past to future. And in the interview with Kamalagar, but he summarized that kind of attitude. My works are intersected in the meeting point of the nearest and the farthest. It is also in time, not only in time. See, I can add that his poetry is a meeting point of centers and margins, or mainstream and fringes in culture, history of the culture. That also I can add with his comment. So that's why he can write he can conceive any kind of historical mythical personalities, from Shiva and Parvati to Jinabai and Kandev and Matsendra and Goraksha to Bhimava of the Tanner caste and Shankardeva of the insane. That's kind of so many subaltern traditions, marginalized traditions and mainstream traditions of the narratives he can put together in his poem like anything. Like an amphibian that organ in waters and in the land, he can traverse from one place to another, one medium to another, one time to another. And some other poems I noted that briefly, I will finish my speech. Rikyu is one of the brilliant poem he wrote on the Japanese saint. And he had and also Shamsi Tabriz, that's from the East Asian, the Middle East traditions, and Sufi tradition. Sufi tradition is one of the powerful tradition in Shivaprakash, like the Shaiva tradition. Both, I think for him it is same. The Shaiva tradition and the Sufi traditions are same. But my observation on this, that Zen Buddhist tradition, that I will mention and finish it. Shaiva wilderness along with a Sufi kind of calmness, he can mix together. But in a way, when I read Rikyu, I found it is not that mixing of calmness and wilderness. It's a violent calmness he brought from Zen Buddhist tradition. Zen Buddhist tradition, at the same time, it is calm and violent. See, the internal violence is very frightening in the Zen Buddhist tradition, and calmness is also something frightening. So that's why the calmness and wilderness mix each other, put it together in such a brilliant poet's psyche. And the city, metaphor of city, always he uses the metaphor of cities. Cities, sometimes it is like universe. Cities, Shiva's cities are something like the whole universe. He can define a city as a universe. And so in a way, he's a global poet. I will end the speech. I think it is a little bit scattered, but I want to touch his poetry. I will finish with one of his Vajana poem he wrote. I will read it. It's about a moon. Had you not drawn up the tainted trace of moon from these polluted waters and worn them on these boundless skies, that is, your matted hair, how would these billion stars appear to be bathing for so many ages? Om Shri Shivalinga, my teacher. What's such a brilliant question to Shiva. I'll read again. Had you not drawn up that tainted trace of moon from these polluted waters and worn them on the boundless skies, that is your matted hair, how would these billion stars appear to be bathing for so many ages? Om Shri Shivalinga, my teacher. I can read this poem as an environmental poem. It's a poem about the climate change also. Not only a devotional poem, a devotion to Shiva. And see, I want to translate into Malayalam and read it, but I didn't get the time to translate. For that I will read one of I adopted a lullaby of Shiva into Malayalam, and it put in my book also as my own poem. I dedicated to Shiva. It's a small poem. It's a lullaby he recited for me 25 years back in Delhi. The night song, Padira Pata. Nattapadirayku ñെട്ടിയുണരുന്ന കുട്ടാ കൂരുന്നേ കരയരുത്. My throat is not normal. നട്ടപ്പാതിരായ്ക്ക് ഞെട്ടിയുണരുന്ന കുട്ടാ കൂരുന്നേ കരയരുത്. വിറകുതടി പോൽ എരുത്തിലിരുട്ടത്ത് കയർ കെട്ടിയിട്ട കറമ്പിപ്പയ്യ്. വിറകുതടി പോൽ എരുത്തിലിരുട്ടത്ത് കയർ കെട്ടിയിട്ട കറമ്പിപ്പയ്യ്. പുലരുമ്പോഴേക്ക് ചൂരത്തു നിനക്കായി അകിടു നിറച്ച് നുരയും പാല്. നട്ടപ്പാതിരാവിൻ അറ്റമീരുട്ടല്ല കുട്ടാ കൂരുന്നേ കരയരുത്. നട്ടപ്പാതിരാവിൻ അറ്റം ഇരുട്ടല്ല കുട്ടാ കൂരുന്നേ കരയരുതേ. And that is how this precious moment, this session is inaugurated. Thank you.